In the last episode, I showed how I began building my new wildlife pond. And in this episode, I want to show you all how it's progressed and how I've taken it one step further to encourage even more wildlife to visit my pond. So with winter finally over, it was time to start adding a few plants around the pond. And the first plant that I wanted to add was this small spindle tree. It had grown somewhere else in my garden, so it was just a matter of moving it to a position I liked. The idea of this being it'll give birds somewhere to perch after bathing in the pond. Spindle trees are also native to the UK, so this will be great for the local wildlife. Next up was this large fern. I know it doesn't look much here, but as you can see, I'm actually chopping this fern up into smaller chunks and then planting those chunks individually. Hopefully this will give me plenty more ferns, but I've never actually done this until now, so time will tell if these are successful and grow in the future. Now my next plan was to add a second perch on the opposite side of the pond. And I was thinking that if I was taking photos of birds, this would be an ideal spot to photograph them after they've bathed. However, as soon as I placed the perch in the hole that I just created, you can see I already wasn't sure. I knew that the compost bins were behind it, and this will obviously affect photos in the future, but for right now it just didn't look right, so I decided to leave it. And maybe I'll add it again in the future, but let me know what you think. Should I reinstall the perch or should I leave it for now? Now, the last plant that I wanted to add was this really small black currant bush, and I'd actually grown this from seed. It was really easy to do so. I just took a black currant, crushed it in my fingers and planted it in some soil. Eventually it grew, and this is the result. It's not very old, so at this point I was just testing to see if it could grow outside. I do have more that I'm going to plant around the pond eventually, and hopefully they'll bear lots of fruit, which I know blackbirds in particular absolutely love. So let's see how this one goes. As the days continue to get warmer and longer, more wildlife began to return to the pond. I was particularly pleased to see some collared doves here bathing in the shallow water. I'd never actually seen them at the pond before, so this was a first on my trail camera. But actually, it was a different species altogether that particularly caught my eye on the trail camera. The magpie. These magpies have often been flying around my garden, but never actually venturing into it. And it wasn't until I actually built this pond and set up a trail camera that I started to see them frequently visit the garden. There's definitely more than one magpie in my local area, so I'm really hoping that they'll continue to visit the pond, as I'd love to get a chance of photographing them. I know some people aren't always the biggest fans of magpies, but at the end of the day, they're just a wild bird, and I think they've actually got such a nice look that they definitely make for a great photo. So fingers crossed in the future I will get one of those. I'll be sure to post it if I do. But I definitely enjoyed watching the magpie, and I even managed to film him one evening when he was taking a bath and then hanging out in a nearby spindle tree and drying off his feathers. Definitely looking forward to seeing more of them, and hopefully they'll continue to return in the future. I had seen this large rock in my garden covered in moss and decided that it might be a great place to photograph birds perching as they're drinking from the pond. And this got me thinking that maybe I should add a few more, so that's what I continued to do. I added stones both in the pond and around it, with the idea being that this will give insects and amphibians lots of different places to hide, which will hopefully encourage even more wildlife such as birds, maybe the hedgehog and different things like that will then root around and search for food. Now obviously I wanted to give all the insects and amphibians a fighting chance, so I made sure that rocks like this had different nooks and walkways in which they could escape from predators. I even added this small frog hotel, which I really like the look of, and I think it's a great addition to the pond. Hopefully it'll get a lot of use, and something tells me that it definitely will. In the first episode, you might remember me showing this new frog spawn. Well, it wasn't long before the frog spawn continued to grow, and inside the little tadpoles began to emerge. And before long, these tadpoles were absolutely everywhere in the pond. There was definitely more than I originally thought there would be, but it soon became clear as to why there are so many tadpoles, and that's to do with increasing the chance of survival, because in fact, almost all of these tadpoles will become food for other creatures and predators around the pond. Of all the different species around the pond, one predator stood out the most. You guessed it, the common blackbird. Almost every day I would see the blackbirds visiting the pond and plucking out tadpoles from the shallow waters. But it wasn't all bad news. A lot of the time the blackbirds would stop and enjoy a nice refreshing bath in the cool waters to escape the heat. And after watching these birds for so long, it was really nice that one morning I saw this parent blackbird feeding two of its chicks along the edge of the pond. As food was abundant, it was clear that these birds were doing really well and looked really healthy. I was particularly pleased to see one of the chicks even enjoy a bath of its very own. Blackbirds are definitely one of my favourite birds to watch around the pond, so I wish these chicks the best of luck, and hopefully we'll be seeing plenty more of them in the future. As different plants continued to grow around the pond, I started to notice a huge increase in the insect population. Anything from these small damselflies all the way up to the larger dragonflies. This particular dragonfly is a broad-bodied chaser, and you can tell it's a male from its blue body. The female, on the other hand, looks more like this. Whilst similar in size to the male, her bright yellow body clearly shows the distinction between the two. And in this clip, you can actually hear her laying the eggs in the water below. Check it out. I actually watched this female return to the exact same spot several times, and when she was gone, I could actually see some of the eggs visible on this foliage in the water. So hopefully there'll be plenty more dragonflies returning to the pond in the future. Although I enjoyed watching the dragonflies visit the pond, I have to say that the birds will always be my favourite. And I've really enjoyed seeing more finches enter the garden, particularly this greenfinch. In recent years, greenfinches have suffered heavily due to disease, and it's really nice seeing them return to the garden once again. My aim for the future of this pond will be to encourage even more birds just like these, and hopefully photograph them in their natural environment, and just enjoy them visiting my garden once more. So stay tuned for even more updates on the pond, and subscribe for future videos.